a religion is meant to change your thoughts on stuff. Is it meant to control your thoughts though?
Well, if a religion pops up that's like trying to get people off of social media and off of their electronics because maybe their goal is to have your brain development be better, then is that is that a form of thought control? Because information control, behavior control, is it a form of all that when it's really just trying to optimize human happiness? Which, let's be honest, I mean, the data is pretty clear. Our happiness hasn't been better
since
the
getting
onset
phones
of
social media.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Brothers Random Show. My name is Travis.
I'm Michael.
And we are two ordinary brothers discussing extraordinary ideas and some random shit. So the topics on our show range from theology, masculinity, movies, philosophy, books, pop culture, and many other subjects. We often talk about the people we admire and the wisdom that they share. People such as Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, who we believe is the sage of our time. Michael, we're talking cults again. And why does this subject interest us?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we both grew up in a cult.
Diet
cult
cult.
Light. It's funny because we had Ben on. We talked about how different his upbringing was. The Fresh King Benjamin was on, and we interviewed with him, but who's also our nephew. But he up and coming comedian that's getting actually some pretty great traction, being that he grew up in a cult and he's using that as kind of part of his bit. We grew up a little bit differently, and but we came out of that, and so our interest is kind of peaked when it comes to cults because we've kind of lived through that. Well, while I was in it, I did a lot of research into the Jonestown, the People's Temple, I believe was their name, but where they had a mass suicide of over 900 people dying, and it was a tragedy, and I think it made a lot of people just kind of question, wake up, and become interested. I don't know. Megyn Kelly, she finds herself very, very fascinated by cults, I think. And she did an episode, and you sent it to me, and we can just get into that.
Yeah, it's a great episode that she put out a couple weeks back, and the thing is that I guess being raised in it, we can see the holes in them, and I also did a little bit of research into. I started watching the Heaven's Gate documentary on HBO. It's a four-part documentary series from 2020, and one of the really fascinating things that is said in this documentary. There's a psychologist a talking head essentially in this documentary series who says that in the 70s were primed for this because there was social unrest in our country and there was poverty, and he said that's why so many of these cults cropped up. So basically all the cults that we know a lot about now that were very damaging started in the 70s.
Did they all start in California? Because in Megyn Kelly's interview, she talked about that a little bit, that California was, for whatever reason, California became almost like a breeding ground in the 70s for cults.
And they also blame a lot of it on the drug drugs that was kind of going through there, because California was kind of known for its, well, it's still
acid,
known.
ecstasy. I
Yeah.
couldn't. Yeah.
All the,
Okay.
yeah. And I think so she has Dr. Stephen Hassan on.
Right? They do have something good to reel you in until you learn about all the other stuff. But by that point, they're hoping it's too late.
So I want you to be clear and understand, and your listeners, that people don't understand what the group is and what the beliefs are or what's going to happen to them. If there was actual informed consent where people understood what the beliefs were, people wouldn't get involved in the first place. In my work and in my doctoral dissertation that I did, I talk about behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control variables. I call it the BITE model of authoritarian control.
And they talk about his, I don't know how, I'm probably butchering his last name, but they talk about his BITE model that he created. He grew,
and he came out of the Moonies.
He
right?
came out of the Mooney cult, which is also another California cult. So California seems to be like the hub of cults. So
that in Utah, maybe.
Well, Utah, yeah.
We'll
the thing is that Utah's cults all kind of branch out of the Mormonism, and that's what's so basically the really weird cults that have to do with like science fiction and stars and stuff like that seems to branch out of California, and then all the ones that deal with like
branch out of Mormonism
comes from Utah. So it's like
interesting.
I don't know which one's better or worse when it comes to this kind of stuff. But so I'd like to talk a little bit about Hassan's BITE model. His BITE model, it's called the BITE model of authoritarian control. And he joined a cult and then had a car accident, and that was like the in for his family to point out. So while he was recovering in the hospital, his family was able to come to him and go, "You're in a cult. We need to get you out, and here's why." And then he dedicated his life to getting people out of cults. His whole life is dedicated to this, which is, I mean, I bet you his books are fascinating. So the BITE model starts with behavioral control is the first one. Information control is the second. Thought control is the third. Emotional control is the fourth. And he gives, like, on his website, he gives a ton of information about these, but it is fascinating for these different, this model. So behavioral, like, and you and I, we did, if you are interested, we did a small video about 2 or 3 months ago about cults.
Yeah, we did kind of a discussion of cult versus religion.
Yeah.
And it was in extension to a conversation that Joe Rogan had with Brett Weinstein.
Brett Weinstein. Yeah.
Our audience seemed to enjoy it. We
that's
enjoyed
number 15.
That's
episode 15, religions versus cults. And we kind of dive into the idea because, I mean, excuse me, you and I are not against religions. We're, we talk a lot about religions. We have a lot of people on who talk about religions. We're not against religion. And so we find it fascinating where the line between religion and cult kind of lie. And Joe Rogan's argument is that all religions were cults, but you and I don't agree with that sentiment, even though Joe is right on his, I guess his.
And that's kind of what made the discussion with the Brett Weinstein so
interesting. Yeah,
interesting was because he kind of pushed back a little bit on that, right? Just because you have a collective belief and that, helps you in community doesn't mean that is parasitical,
Yeah. Yeah.
being a parasite for the people.
Yeah. Which is what a cult essentially does. If you follow the bite model with all, you basically, a cult is any extreme belief. So basically, like politics, I think
and Megyn Kelly actually mentions that. She kind of mentioned almost, she's like, I'm not calling Fox a cult, but like there was, she could see a little bit of cult mentality kind of
Fox News,
in that culture a little bit.
Well,
now let's be real here. There's a lot of that can go, like, I mean, Ford versus Chevy, Samsung versus Apple. Like there's a lot of things that people can get just a little bit weird on.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and it's just,
but if you follow the bite model, right? So if you go, okay, they're trying to control behavior. They're trying to control thought, information, and emotions. So it's basically, if you can't, if you're part of a group that will not accept any what do you call it, ulterior information, like
alternative
information, then you might be in a cult. And so that's why Megyn Kelly was saying that, is because at Fox News, when she was there, she was kind of like, well, we can't like go out of our lane, you know. And it's such a bizarre, I don't know.
But she also says that, I guess she did some work with MSNBC. So she said it was kind of the same. What?
Yeah, it was ABC, I think, is what she said.
Oh, okay.
Was it?
But it was similar. Yeah. She said it was similar there too. Like there was, kind of both sides.
All the news organizations are like that.
I'm sure they're probably pretty
well, and I would
at this.
I would imagine they have rules too. Like you can't broach this subject, and because a lot of them are in the pockets of big pharma, they can't actually speak out against any specific, like Pfizer like basically does, like, provides money to these networks, every single network. So that's why you never heard anything against the virus of unspecified origins. So
going off, isn't that what Critical Drinker says?
Yeah, that's what he calls it.
The virus of unspecified origins. Yeah. So no, it's interesting to try and kind of check ourselves throughout while going through life. It's interesting. Will some of these leaders, do they allow themselves to be up for scrutiny? Do they allow themselves to be mocked? Like, is there, and that falls into your kind of your bite model. If they're all about the control of the behavior, the information, the thought, they're not going to allow these things, right? And it's interesting because, like, each one of those, I can kind of pinpoint in my head, like, things while, growing up in this polygamist organization that was kind of fell in those things. Yeah.
Behavioral control, right? And Benjamin talked about this, he talks about it in his stand-up. It's something about, like, when you get horny, start singing hymns.
Right.
Which caused all sorts of problems, obviously. And then information control, like, we weren't allowed to, he wasn't allowed to watch rated R movies. We snuck rated R movies. Like, we found ways to do it.
Oh, I don't know if it was sneaking. I remember
it was
telling me to
for
go
us.
See Braveheart. He's like, I want you to go watch that movie. And he lent me the Brand of Brothers, which was definitely a R-rated HBO series.
It was usually Curtis our older brother, who actually passed away very recent, or 10 years ago, but his anniversary is passing away is very is
Close.
Anyway, it's been 10 years. So he used to bring videos. That's how I watched rated R movies, because at the time we weren't allowed. But
So probably Aliens, Terminator.
Curtis found ways to rent them or borrow them from other people, and we always ended up watching them. So there was always that. So that's an
Terminator
information
2, which had an R rated rating, which would probably just be a PG-13
movie today. Pretty much.
How we have fallen.
Yeah.
But
so information control, and then there was thought control. They're basically telling you what to think or how to think. You can see this, in a, and then there's also emotional control. So you gotta that's where the keep sweet, pray and obey people, nut jobs come in, right?
Yep.
Because they're basically telling you, don't cry, you got to be sweet and pray and then obey us.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting because Megan, she kind of asks the question. She's like, how do you, because this doctor did some work on Nexium as well. And Megan Kelly, she's just like, I've been to seminars, like motivational seminars and stuff, and I feel like they are good to do. If you watch Tony Robinson's events, Tony Robbins, events. Sorry, they almost, there is a little bit of that.
Religious fervor,
some of that religious kind of fervor, emotional control, thought control. Because a lot of times you're trying to rewire your brain so that you can get control of your emotions, get control of your productivity, right? I'm in sales, so it's a mind game all the time. You're just
try to be better, to kind of optimize yourself. And that's where these, like Tony Robbins comes in, is that I don't see Tony Robbins as a cult, but I could see where people thought that he would be like a cult leader,
or could be, or has some of those. Because that was probably Nexium, that's probably kind of how it started out.
Yeah, it's like a self-help kind of thing.
It's tough to draw the line. It is kind of hard to be able to know where that line is of this is self-help, and this kind of rah we're helping each other, we're growing, we're loving each other,
supporting each other,
versus supporting each other, versus and allowing that to divulge into, okay, we're gonna brand my initials on your crotch. Just and that's what for those who don't know, that's what happened in Nexium.
Nexium was known as this. Well, okay, yeah, we should explain. So Nexium was known as this self-help seminars, and Keith Raniere was the leader of it, and he had already been in trouble with the law once, I think, and he got this woman involved, and she helped him brand this, and it became this massive thing, and to the point where it had celebrities, a couple of B-list celebrities who were joining, and all sorts of crazy stuff. But what he did is, it started out as the self-help thing, but the people who were really into it and who were really dedicated to him, he found a way to start having sexual relationships with them, and then he convinced them all to brand themselves with his initials. And that's definitely cult-like behavior. Tony Robbins isn't asking people to brand themselves. So
he is asking people to walk across coals.
Oh, does he?
Think so. I'm pretty sure he does that.
Oh, really?
Maybe he doesn't do that anymore. The seminar I did was during COVID with him, and it was all online.
So you've been to? Oh, it was.
Yeah, I did a whole seminar with him.
Joined the other cult.
Switch cults.
Well, that's the shit that we get for being followers of Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we just joined another cult.
They just joined another cult, apparently.
Well,
but that's the thing, is that these gurus aren't opposed to scrutiny, right? So like Tony Robbins gets scrutinized all the time. Jordan Peterson's getting scrutinized all the time. In fact, Jordan Peterson has publicly made his scrutiny, like he did a YouTube video of the scrutiny that he was experiencing, and he was like, I'm open to it and I'm ready to learn about my own behavior. So like, does a cult leader do that, or is a cult leader? So this is what the Stephen Hassan posits in his interview with Megyn Kelly, is that he says there are basically three things to a cult leader that they're after. They're after power, money, and sex. One of those three things. It's always one of those three things. And they have to have what is it? A narcissistic personality. And they have to have a narcissistic personality that does not tolerate scrutiny.
I don't know. I don't think, let me be clear. I don't think some of these self-help gurus like Tony Robbins are cult leaders. I don't think that. I don't, and I definitely don't agree with when people say that Jordan Peterson is a cult leader. But I can see where a lot of people are wanting to throw them in the same boat. Like, I guess I can kind of see a little bit of that. They are very robust, like they have charisma, right? They're leading, and they have charisma. And so, and a lot of cult leaders start out that way. That's kind of where they
well, and do you
a lot
think
of them are that way? So
do you think the saying absolute, or power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely, do you think that would apply to some of these? So maybe they start out with really good intentions, and then they kind of delve into this corrupted. I don't think Keith Raniere ever had good intentions. I think he was a kind of a loser who had figured out how to talk his way into people's pants. That's how he was definitely motivated by.
So Megyn Kelly points this out. She's just like, why are they always like these not always, but it just seems like a lot of times there are these very unattractive.
Yeah, L. Ron Hubbard was a big fat guy, like he. So it seems like that's what
the David Koresh, the Waco guy.
Yeah, the Waco guy. He was a little
like a skinny, just not attractive.
Yeah,
I don't know. So there's some weird kind of, like, why? And maybe, I mean, if you want to look at it evolutionarily, it's like maybe it's another strategy of like passing on their genes, their legacy. If they feel like they have the option of being, going quietly into the night or becoming a nefarious villain, maybe might as well be a nefarious villain, right? I don't know.
Well, it's like
Uh,
Keith Raniere reminds you of like the quintessential incel, right? He's like this small, diminutive man
mhm.
who had ambitions that were never reached, and then so he's like, okay, so maybe I start this self-help thing, and then he
Mhm.
gets like a little bit more power and a little bit more power, and he's like, oh, what about this and what about this and that, and then he's getting into the beautiful lady's pants and all that. So he's getting what he wants through nefarious, and like, and I don't know if they set out to be that way. Like there's a lot of
Maybe
accounts
they
that,
don't, and they may not. They may not set out that with those
but if they have
intentions.
like narcissistic tendencies, then that would push them into the realm of destruction. So
Possibly.
there's a lot
I
of
mean,
accounts that L. Ron Hubbard was did started Scientology because he wanted to get a tax write-off, because he was being taxed to death, because he'd already written like something outrageous, like 200
a bunch of
novels,
books, and then
and he was
just
getting
get yeah,
he was
yeah.
getting taxed out of oblivion. And so he was like, I need to start a religion so that I can get some kind of tax write-off. And I mean, that now it's a multi-million-dollar religion. In fact, Top Gun Maverick, pretty much your money that you paid to Top Gun Maverick went to Scientology.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Tom
Maybe,
Cruise
but
made like something like $40 million off of that movie, and growing. Like he's got back end. What do they call it? Actors get who have special deals
well,
get
didn't
back
he
end.
produce it?
He produced it, yeah.
Yeah. So, um,
So, um,
it's
like,
tough.
so
It's tough to know.
in the Heaven's Gate documentary series, there was a psychologist that states that the country was in a weird place, and I think we're going to start seeing more cults
Pop up now.
pop up now, because our country is in a very volatile state.
You might you might be right. And here's and this is a thought. Okay. Because
So before you do that, before you hold that thought, in the 70s, basically all of the cults that we know of started in the 70s. All the famous cults. You got the Manson cults, the Heaven's Gate, the Moonies, the Field, which is one that Megyn Kelly talks about in that interview. They all started in the 70s. And they were the murderous type. The ones that started now tend to not be I would have to say not be as murderous, but what were you
it
what were you going to
could
say?
it be that it was following? Could it be that it was following the 1973 oil crisis?
Yeah, because there was a huge oil crisis. There was,
And that might have
we just had
tailspinned a few things.
the Nixon issue.
Mm.
The Watergate had just happened. I think Watergate happened in the 60s, but it basically came into I mean, ramifications of something happened years afterwards. So they had that.
72. Watergate was 72. Yeah.
So
Interesting.
social unrest in your country, political unrest, financial unrest.
Mm.
We got all three. We got President, regardless of what you think about President Trump, he's been indicted. It'll be the first time in our entire country's history that a leading candidate is being indicted, and former president is being indicted. It'll be the first time in history that this has ever happened. And what that does, so we got social unrest with everything, like race has now become an issue again. It's so bizarre. We went through all the 80s and 90s it not being an issue, and now we've got an issue. We got the gender dysphoria issue that's going on in the holy month of Pride. We've got so those are social issues that we're still dealing with. We got a financial crisis because of a excuse me, of a virus of unspecified origins. We've got an energy crisis that's happening because everybody thinks we need to get off of fossil fuels. So I think we're primed for a cult, for big cult, like just the cult of all cults. And we might already be seeing some of them, because I think that the political parties have become somewhat cultish if they're trying to control information and behavior. Right. If you follow the bite model, excuse me, on both ends,
control information,
the control of information on both ends of the spectrum. So if you're going politics, you've got the liberals and the Democrats and the Republicans, and you've got on each end, you've got people who don't want to cross the aisle, and they're sold into their
or a little cult like in their in their beliefs on either side, right?
Yeah, and I think the country. So whoever wins in that scenario, I think the country loses, right?
I was gonna say we might. I think you could be right. We could be seeing a surge of memberships in cults kind of going up, something to that effect. There's people like taking advantage. There could be organizations or even individuals that might take advantage of that,
of vulnerability.
Yeah, that vulnerability.
People are taking advantage when they're very vulnerable.
Because I get it. I mean, we're protecting your kids from like social media, and there's studies done that these kids being on their phones for so long is bad for them, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of things. And I could see somebody coming along and like, well, join this organization because we are gonna, separate you from the electronics. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that.
Yeah,
and like it'll be good for kids, better growing up for kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then
there's such a fine line between what is good and what is nefarious. I think it goes back to our old discussion with Brett Weinstein, where he basically said, is it parasitical?
Yeah.
Does the religion cause harm to the individual? So and that's where you go with the bite model, right? You go, is the organization trying to control your behavior? Well, how far do you go with the behavior, right?
I mean, it's like
if you are a drug-addled person, AA, which is religiously based, is one of the only things that helps people out of that scenario, right? So that's controlling behavior. So is it controlling behavior negatively, or is it controlling behavior positively? So
that's the question. It's like,
so how do we give in? So if you give in to your instincts of being a drug-addled person, you're going to have you're just going to ruin your life, will implode. So, but that's a behavioral control, right? So you can't.
Yeah,
it's a hard.
Just because it has behavioral control doesn't mean
that it's got the cult mentality, right? And then there's information control, right? I mean, I think it has to have all four of these kind of combined to actually be considered a cult. So it can't just be one of those things. So you could argue that a religion is behavioral control, but they don't control your information. They may try. They may just suggest, the LDS Church does this. They tell people not to watch rated R movies, but it doesn't matter. nowadays it doesn't matter. I mean, the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 I saw a few months back, and I was like, and I took my 12-year-old to it, and I was like, holy shit, this should have been rated R. I mean, just because of the violence, there was just a massive amount of violence, and I was just shaking my head going, I should not have taken my 12-year-old to this. But what my point is that, so that's an informational control, right? That's that, the LDS church pushes that pretty heavily. Thought control. Now, a religion is meant to change your thoughts on stuff. Is it meant to control your thoughts though?
Well, if a religion pops up that's like trying to get people off of social media and off of their electronics because maybe their goal is to have your brain development be better, then is that a form of thought control? Because information control, behavior control, is it a form of all that when it's really just trying to optimize human happiness? Which, let's be honest, I mean, the data is pretty clear. Our happiness hasn't been better
since
the
getting
onset
phones
of
social media.
Yeah. Like, okay. I mean, I don't know.
I know.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say.
And then there's also emotional control, which you cannot work in certain environments and be emotionally controlled. Like you can't cry at everything in certain environments. So
in a way, that's a form of emotional control. Like if you,
but so like if you work in any manual labor industry, if you cry at everything that drops on your foot or knocks you down or something like that, you are not going to be in that job for very long. So having control of your emotions, your own control of your emotions, is a good thing. But when an organization tries controlling your emotions, I don't know. Because you could argue that with your job. So I think that the best way to look at the bite model is to basically say, if it's a religion that does all 4 of those things, then it's probably a cult. If they're trying to control all 4 forms of those. Now, if they're trying to control 2 or 3, maybe not. I mean, that might be a good way to look at it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a tough, it is a tough way to look at it.
I would say that a good way to gauge would be, does it encourage your self-betterment, even if you are not involved with that one organization, if that makes sense, right?
Oh, you mean if you were to step away from the organization and still follow their teachings, would they be
like, are they okay with that? Right now, obviously every organization has an incentive to keep that organization being like, they want to propagate themselves. So it's hard for that, but
are they okay with you leaving? Are they okay with you having relationships outside of the organization?
Things like that, right? Like, are you allowed to have a friend that doesn't agree, or maybe be part of the organizations that is the antithesis of your organization? Right. So I think if that if that's allowed, and also this goes back to Brett and Joe talking about this, but basically if it's not being a parasite to the individuals,
Yeah.
and I would say a parasite for the betterment of the leader, that's probably a big thing, would be, is this parasitical to you for the betterment of the leader? Then question that shit. Like that's probably not what you want to be part of. That's what I would say.
And
because
this is kind of an ongoing discussion. There's probably a lot that we're missing, but I want to take a moment to pivot a little bit in our discussion. Our last episode about this, which is episode 15, we talked about the trauma that most people feel after leaving a cult. And I was a little bit disparaging towards people leaving Mormonism because I was comparing it to kind of the religions like Scientology or the field cult, or where they actually kind of enslaved people. Kept there's claims that Scientologists actually lock some of their people up who are out of line and that sort of thing. And I was just trying to keep away from the victim mentality, because the religion that we grew up in, the AUB, was it stand for again, Michael?
Apostolic United Brethren.
So culty sounding. That one and Mormonism in general. I believe that's why I call it diet cult, because they're not like keeping people in dungeons. They're not beating people for being wrong. They just have a way of, and this is why they get kind of compared to a cult, is that they're kind of teaching people the bite model, right? They're controlling emotions, they're controlling thoughts, they're controlling information, they're controlling and that's where people kind of get this idea that they're a full-blown cult. And I think there are variations, but what I was trying to get to is that to stay away from the victim mentality, because I think that in itself could be a cult mentality, right? The poor me, I left Mormonism, or I left polygamy, and I'm traumatized by it. And since then, we've talked to Benjamin. So I think I've changed my stance a little bit on it. It's okay for people to feel that way about it. I don't like the victim mentality of people, because if you use comparison, right, it's far inferior to a cult like Nexus, where in order to get to the highest echelons, you have to basically fuck the leader. So it's like, or is it
and brand yourself,
or is it called Nexium? Nexium. I called it Nexus. So I just wanted to kind of address that, because I mean, obviously, talking to Benjamin, he felt traumatized by our upbringing, but I don't feel that way. I don't feel like I was traumatized, but also I have
everybody's experiences are going to be a little bit different. And I mean, even the gal, what was her name, Michelle something, that was talking about the field. She's on Megan Kelly's podcast. She was talking about growing up in the cult known as the field. And she was sexually abused.
She was sexually abused. Yeah. Yeah.
But she actually appreciated that her mother kind of told her that, in a sense, kind of gave her the tools to not carry that through life, and being and allowing that to have her keep a victim mentality. So
Yeah.
I agree with that. It is kind of hard to relate when I didn't feel like I had a horrible upbringing. I actually thought I don't feel like a victim from it. And so it's when there are people who do feel like they were victimized and came out of that organization with trauma.
We just need to maybe be a little bit more respectful towards that.
Just have some empathy for those people and what they're going through, I think.
Yeah.
But my buddy told me this once. He's just like, I'm trying to do everything I can for my kids, like, and I want them to have a successful, great life, free of any kind of cult mentality in their life or anything like that. And he's like, I still think that my kids are probably gonna lay on a couch with a therapist someday and say that, my dad drove me to be successful and it left me scarred.
Yeah.
So I don't know that might be part of the human condition, is to feel
victimized by your youth, essentially.
I mean, and for every person that feels like they were traumatized by their religion, there's somebody out there that was traumatized by their father's alcoholism or their mother's drug addiction, or I mean Eminem talks about his mother's drug addiction. Freaking so this is life. Like, I mean, we're here. We're making the best of it, the most of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't. And let's all rise above.
Yeah. Well, and this trauma, this idea of the religious trauma feeds right into basically a saying that Benjamin talked about, was the hijacked worship. And I find this a very fascinating idea. For the listening audience, David Foster Wallace was a writer who gave a commencement speech, and it's easy to find online. You just got to put in his name and his commencement speech. It's a really long speech. It's about, I can't remember the length of the video. It's like 20 minutes long. And he talks about worship. He says, as human beings, we do not choose if we worship. We only choose what we worship. And Benjamin gave us this idea of the hijacked worship. And he's very embittered over it. And I don't blame him for it, because what hijacked worship is it's basically not giving you the freedom to choose what you worship. And this may be what people are talking about when they talk about Mormonism causing trauma, right? So Mormonism is a very rigid religion, right? You can't look at other religions. You follow it to this nth degree. They don't do caffeine, they don't do alcohol. There's all these reasons for that, but when it seems like it's forced on your upbringing, that's where I think the hijacked worship comes in, right? This notion that you weren't given a choice in what you worship. You were told what you worship, and then that causes trauma. I think if you're given the choice to what you worship, that may, and in this commencement speech by David Foster Wallace, he actually mentions these things. He's like, if sex is what you worship, then you're looking at losing that in old age. If money's what you worship, there's the possibility of that going away too. It's like choose something that you worship that may not eventually go away from you. So this is why worshiping a God is important, I think. Now, this isn't what David Foster Wallace, he didn't ruminate more on that, but it's a very interesting idea, because if you have something other than God that you worship, most likely that's going to go away. Now, if you take the idea, if you have a hard time with God, like even existing, you shouldn't have an issue with the worship of him because of the necessity of it. Right? So am I making any sense here?
Yeah.
So you basically, if God exists or if God doesn't exist, doesn't matter. It matters that you worship him, because when you get to a point in your life where the money and the sex and the fandom or something goes away, the Almighty God might not go away. You can still believe in this, even if it's fictional or if it's not fictional. If you worship it, it's there, right?
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Jordan,
like,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
One of the reasons
Peterson would say that would be like almost like a striving for the ultimate good, like the highest good.
The highest
would be
good.
kind of that thing,
the worship
that's out there.
The thing that you should worship is the ultimate highest good, right? So
and talking on, do you want to finish that thought?
Yeah, let me. So we did a Star Wars episode a few weeks ago, and after doing that episode, I kind of delved into a lot of the complaints of the Star Wars franchise, and I think that one of the reasons that people are so upset with the basically shitting all over the Star Wars franchise is because they had nothing else to worship, right? So this is extreme fandom. They have this thing that they love and they adore it, and then somebody comes along and creates more of it that isn't up to par, isn't as good, isn't as thought-provoking or whatever it is, and so they lose that worship, right? And that's why they're so angry about it. It's the same thing that happened with Game of Thrones. I think I've brought this up before, but the meltdown online of the last season of Game of Thrones was so fascinating to watch because people were so angry about it. And it's like, well, if you are choosing to worship something that isn't maybe worthy of your worship, it's gonna go away. So if you're a supermodel that's obsessed with her looks, the old age is what's gonna put you out of your worship.
Yeah.
And money goes away. You can make a bad investment if you're a multimillionaire. We've seen multimillionaires lose their fortunes.
Yeah.
So is it better to worship a God that may or may not exist when you can access that at your lowest moment? Or is it better to worship something that's created by man and is fallible?
And I would agree. I think that's worshiping that highest good. And I think that as humans, we have it within our nature to want to worship something, and I think this goes back to that hijacked worship, is that it's kind of within us to want to have something to worship, and nefarious people can come along and they use, and I would say, I mean, hijack worship is a great term. I love the term hijacked worship.
Yeah.
But it could also be just hijacked human want. Because I think we do want to worship something greater and outside ourselves.
Yes. It's
I
a
think that
human
we want
instinct to be that. Yeah.
Yep. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. I was listening to Michaela Peterson had a guy on that was a kind of a cult expert, and I forget his name, Ross, I think, but he talked about how sometimes these people will like join this organization, they'll get love bombed, and they continue to be love bombed so much that they don't even care about the facts. They just want to be part of this organization where they receive love. Like doesn't,
if
they're
you've
just
ever,
like,
if you've ever
doesn't even
walked
matter.
into a church that you've never been in, everybody comes up to you and shakes your hand.
I mean, it's great. I'm not dissing that. It's when they it's that hijack part, right? It's to get you hooked so that we can exploit you.
Yeah.
So that this organization or this leader can exploit you by hijacking this human want.
Yeah. And
yeah.
And the what's the nihilistic person, or the person that has thinks horrible of humanity, is going to, one of the things that Hassan, was it Stephen Hassan, says, is that it's not dumb people that that this happens to. These are intelligent people. Even intelligent people will believe, like Heaven's Gate believed that the aliens from heaven would come pick them up and take them away. Okay, so they weren't non-intelligent people. And Hassan says this. He says, like a lot of people who join cults do it because of this sense, this need for belonging. And that's what human beings are. And I think that's why we're primed for a really big cult to come along, because we've come out of COVID. We're 3 years out from COVID, which kept people from being in spaces with other people. And people need interaction with other people. They long for it. And when you don't have that, we are primed. Our whole country, our whole world is primed for cults. And it doesn't have to be a man or a woman. A lot of the time they're men that are leaders, but even the Heaven's Gate, they had a female leader, and Nexus had a female leader. They weren't the lead spokesperson, but they were leaders. So I mean, it's fascinating. It's very fascinating to think that we could be in the midst of something that is huge as far as cults are concerned. And you could argue TikTok is a cult at this point. You could argue that some of the technologies that we're seeing have a very cult-like mentality. I mean, TikTok is designed to keep you on it for as long as possible.
I think you're right. I think we are primed for the onset of some cult. That being said, the tools, there are a couple tools that can be taught and kind of rule bricks to be able to be used to keep people from falling into and being taken advantage of by by a
By a
cult.
cult.
Well,
the bite
one,
model,
and I
right?
mentioned this last time, one is a story in the Bible that I think is a safeguard to cults, and that is the story of Moses, where he says that God would that all men were prophets. So that's one. The other is to recognize slavery of any form. So spiritual slavery, mental slavery, like it's the control.
The control.
And that kind of goes back to
the bite model.
The bite model. But I always liked to think about it as being a slave, because I felt like being in a cult, there were people that that bought into it hook, line, and sinker, and I do feel like they had a slave-like mentality, and it was kind of a mentality of I would do whatever this person said, kind of thing. Like if they told me to jump, I'd jump. That is a slave mentality. And so being and this kind of goes back to
there's brainwashing involved. It feels very much like a brainwash.
Also a safeguard in the Bible, which is when God says, I'm going to destroy the children of Israel, and Moses talks him out of it. And this, I point out this in
true authority means that you can talk to them and talk them out of things.
Means that you get to wrestle with them.
Haha. That's such a great idea. That is so good. Yeah. It is.
Like,
you get to challenge them.
Yeah. Just because they're the authority doesn't mean that you don't get to wrestle with them. And that's exactly what Moses did. That's what Jacob did. That's why Israel is we who wrestle with God.
Wasn't it Abraham that did it too?
With Abraham and Lot. Where he talks, he's like, Sodom and Gomorrah, you're going to destroy.
He argues with him. He argues with
God too. Yes.
Well, and who are we to? You can't go through life thinking that any authority figure you cannot challenge.
Yeah. And that's my point with especially with the Jonestown, which was basically, if God can be questioned, every man should be. Right.
Yes.
So just because, anyway, I truly believe that safeguards against cults are actually built within the Bible, which is funny because there's so many of these cults that we've talked about that used the Christianity as the means to build a cult. I find it completely fascinating because they're using scriptures, etc., Revelation, blah, 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 whatever, but they don't even know the stories within the book that are safeguards against what they're doing.
That is so interesting. The Bible itself tells you, beware of cults. You can challenge authority.
I think so. I think that's the point. The point of these stories was to safeguard against cults. I believe built in are safeguards against cults.
Wow, that is an interesting idea. And nobody talks about that. How many people?
They never teach it. I never learned that. I had to read the Bible cover to cover by myself to learn this. But they never teach that in the cult.
Yeah, of course not. Because
the Bible, follow me because I know how to read this thing. But then
behavioral control, information control, thought control, emotional control. Those are that's how they get you. And if you're controlling all of those things, then they are not giving you a chance. The authority is not giving you a chance to challenge them, which is why our form of government, even though it's failing right now, was the best form of government, is because it's always got this checks and balances against.
To have three branches that could all challenge each other.
Yes.
So it was a safeguard.
Yeah.
Three branches to be able to keep all the other ones in check, which I think, this is, I mean, my personal opinion, I think the two-party system is flawed because it's two.
You need a third.
I think we need a third. The two-party system is built to become polarizing, but if you have a third, then they would all kind of keep each other in check. Anyway, that's another discussion.
Talking about cults, right? Wow, that is really interesting. You should always be able to challenge authority. I think that above the bite model, it's almost above the bite model. If you join an organization at any point that does not encourage challenging the organization itself, then you're probably in the wrong organization.
The idea would be that I would think, because Jacob wrestled with God, and then he was given a blessing. Right. Yeah. So that struggle, sometimes that wrestle of these thoughts, the wrestle of discussion, of debate, of the uncomfortableness of whatever, of being a leader and then also being challenged, right?
The possibility of being wrong.
The possibility of being, yeah, exactly. The possibility of being wrong. Was God wrong? You know, that Moses challenges him and says, no, God, don't do that. Don't destroy the children of Israel. You made all these promises to them. And what will all the other nations say when you made all these promises to them and all these? I mean, he brings an argument to the table.
If you really think about it, it kind of takes God down a peg, doesn't it?
I think it takes humans up a peg. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I think it takes I don't think it takes God down a peg. I think it takes humans up a peg, because sometimes that wrestle is where we get strong.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, they probably, a cult would probably have ways of looking at these stories and being like, no, that's not really what it means. It's not really meaning that, God was just testing him, that God really is the end all be all. And he wasn't wrong. God wasn't wrong. He was just testing Moses. But at the same time, Moses was precursing a savior, right? He was precursing a savior, and a savior, he would go to bat for us on our behalf.
Yeah.
Right. And then also, die for our sins.
Yeah.
So,
but he would challenge the authority.
Challenging the authority. Yeah.
Huh. Wow. I think we'll call it good.
Yeah, that's good. We can end there.
What are our socials?
Follow us on Twitter at Brothers V Random, Instagram, Rumble, all at the Brothers Random. We have a email if you want to email us. We'd love to get some interesting people on to talk about things. So if you want to come on and be interviewed and plug yourself, We're the brothers random V at Gmail.
Yeah. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Just look for the Sword in the Skull. We appreciate all of the subscribers. We appreciate anybody who likes us or shares us. It's all appreciated. And keep reading, keep listening, keep watching, learn more. We'll see you, brother.
See ya.